A child was buried on an island in the Nile over 1,000 years ago. Her grave held no inscription, no offerings, no sign that she had lived a life of importance. And yet, when scientists pried open the dense vault of her skull, specifically the petrous part of the temple bone, they found something astonishing. Her DNA was unlike anything they had expected. In her tiny body, quietly decaying under Christian earth, was the genetic echo of a journey that had crossed continents, civilizations, and millennia. Her bloodline carried markers from sub-Saharan Africa. But alongside those, woven delicately into her mitochondrial code, was ancestry from the Near East, West Eurasian DNA, not from conquerors or crusaders, from mothers, from women who had long ago walked the Nile, settled, and lived, and whose stories had disappeared into dust. What does it mean that a young girl from medieval Nubia holds the genetic imprint of migrations stretching back to the early kingdoms of Egypt, and possibly beyond? Why was she, a genetic mosaic, buried in a graveyard considered to belong to a social underclass? And why, after centuries of silence, is her voice only now being heard? This isn't just her story. It's the story of a land that has been the beating heart of human movement for tens of thousands of years. A land often overlooked, misrepresented, or politicized. But underneath its deserts, temples, and shifting empires lies a genetic archive, one that holds the truth about who we are, where we came from, and how migration shaped not only bodies but entire cultures. Sudan, cradled by the Nile, is not a historical footnote. It is the living, breathing crossroad of humanity. And through the lens of ancient DNA, extracted not from majestic pharaohs, but from unnamed villagers, we're finally beginning to grasp the scale of what this region witnessed. Because sometimes, history doesn't speak through monuments. It whispers through bones. Long before the Nile carved kingdoms into stone, before the pyramids of Meroe rose from the desert, before even Egypt had a name, this land breathed with footsteps, not of conquerors, but of the first humans who dared to wander. Sudan wasn't just a piece of the African map. It was the stage where our species rehearsed its most daring experiment, to move, to adapt, to survive. 12,000 years ago, the Sahara was no desert. It pulsed with rivers, lakes, grasslands, and life. The African humid period transformed what is now barren into an oasis of opportunity. In the heart of that green wilderness, the Wadi Hawar flowed, a now-vanished river that connected the heart of Africa to the Nile. It was along this liquid highway that early humans drifted, not in conquest, but in curiosity. Some fished, others followed game. A few stayed and sowed the first seeds of settlement. The soil still remembers them. Archaeologists speak of Afad 23 with a kind of reverence. There, in northern Sudan, lie the ghost traces of camps that are 50,000 years old. Some of the oldest open-air hut remains ever found. They belong to people who had no kings, no flags, no written word, but their hands shaped tools, their minds measured rivers, and their migrations would define the future genetic structure of an entire continent. And that's the truth often lost in history books. The people of Sudan weren't standing still while the rest of humanity marched forward. They were the march. The Nile didn't just carry water. It carried ancestors, stories, and genes. From the Red Sea coast to the western edge of Wadi Hawar, the land offered an unbroken corridor, not just for humans to leave Africa, but for them to come back, again and again. This two-way dance of migration left fingerprints not in stone, but in blood. Every tribe that passed through, Nubians, Cushites, Nilotics, Proto-Afroasiatics, left something behind in the gene pool. And the Sudanese people of today carry that legacy, often unknowingly. Their DNA is not a single chapter. It's the table of contents for human movement across 3 continents. And that's what makes Sudan different. It's not a cultural melting pot, because empires collided. It's a biological archive, because people chose to keep moving. The migrations never stopped. They just changed form. What began as footsteps became bloodlines. What started as survival became civilization. And while the maps redrew borders and names, the genes remembered everything. Who are the Sudanese? Not by passport or border, but by blood, by the molecules that whisper of forgotten migrations, buried empires, and the quiet inheritance of generations. To answer that question, we must look deeper than language, deeper than skin. We must go where memory cannot follow, into the double helix. Inside the Y chromosomes of Sudanese men, two great signatures emerge: haplogroup J, tied to ancient populations of the Arabian Peninsula, and E1b1b, rooted in the Horn of Africa and the Nile corridor. These are not merely letters and numbers. They are threads from two different worlds. One speaks of desert caravans and Coptic traders, the other of river kingdoms and ancestral pastoralists. Together, they map a story no history book can fully tell. Yet the father line is only half the picture. When we turn to mitochondrial DNA, passed from mother to child, an even older truth emerges. Over 90% of Sudanese maternal lineages fall within the L macrohaplogroup, specifically L3, L2, and L0A1. These are lineages that stretch back tens of thousands of years, deeply rooted in sub-Saharan Africa. They echo the voices of women who survived famines, floods, and droughts, women who carried life, and with it, the core of African ancestry. But even this isn't the full story. Roughly 10% of Sudanese carry Eurasian maternal DNA, including lineages like Pre, HV1, and N1A. This isn't evidence of conquest. It's a record of integration, of women who came through Egypt, perhaps as pilgrims, settlers, or captives, and became part of the living tapestry. Their descendants today may not know their names, but their cells do. Every Sudanese genome is a quilt, stitched from Nile-side marriages, desert crossings, cultural assimilation, and geographic chance. There's no single origin. There's no single type. Instead, there is continuity within complexity, and in that complexity lies identity, not fixed, but fluid. Even within small ethnic clusters, genetics reveal unexpected diversity. The Arab Maziria, for instance, carry both J lineages and high levels of L3 maternal ancestry. The Nubians, often seen as culturally homogeneous, display genetic affinities with both Upper Egypt and southern Nilotic populations. And the Beja, isolated along the Red Sea hills, show signs of East African and Middle Eastern admixture, like a living fossil of ancient trade. It is tempting to search for genetic purity, but in Sudan, purity is an illusion and mixture is the truth. That truth is visible in every cell, every village, every name whispered in ancestral prayers. The people of Sudan are not the result of one migration or one civilization, but of countless movements layered across millennia. They are not a single story. They are the entire library. In a dry bend of the Nile, surrounded by cliffs and silence, lies a place that kept its secret for over 1,000 years, Kulubnardi. At first glance, it's just another archaeological site. But beneath the surface, something remarkable was buried. Not just human bones, but a profound message about identity, inequality, and the illusion of difference. Two cemeteries sat apart by geography, and, it was once believed, by class. One, built on the mainland, was filled with bodies that bore signs of longevity, of relative nourishment and peace. The other, across the water on a rugged island, held the young, the malnourished, the broken. The contrast was stark. So stark, in fact, that for decades, scholars believed these burial grounds reflected two biologically separate classes, perhaps even two distinct ethnic groups. But when ancient DNA was finally extracted from 66 individuals buried at Kulubnardi, the truth shattered that assumption. They were one people. Genome-wide analysis proved it. The children buried on the island and the elders on the mainland shared the same ancestry. In many cases, they were family, grandparents buried miles away from their grandchildren, siblings laid to rest across class lines. The physical signs of social division were undeniable, but the genetics revealed no biological boundary. In other words, the society had divided itself, but not along genetic lines. Status was assigned, not inherited through blood, and even in a world with hardship, hierarchy, and perhaps exploitation, the boundaries of class were permeable. It was not caste. It was circumstance. Second-degree relatives, uncle to niece, aunt to nephew, were buried apart. This single fact flips our assumptions upside down. Unlike many ancient societies where status was tightly bound to birth, the people of Kulubnardi lived in a community where mobility, though limited, was possible. You could be born into hardship and still share blood with those in positions of advantage. This isn't just a scientific observation. It's a human story. A child laid to rest in soil baked by desert sun may have once shared meals, laughter, and memories with someone whose bones now rest in a place of honor. And yet their cells, examined over a millennium later, tell the same origin tale. Kulabnardi forces us to confront a difficult question. How many of the divisions we accept today of race, class, nationality are truly written in our DNA? And how many are constructed, defended, and reinforced by systems that pretend to be natural? In the end, these graves do not whisper of separation. They declare a hidden unity. Through their silence, they ask us to look deeper than appearances, deeper than labels, into the space where ancestry, identity, and dignity are not divided by land, but united by lineage. When we think of ancestry moving through history, we imagine men, traders, warriors, kings, crossing borders and fathering legacies. That's the story we've always told. But in the ancient cemeteries of Sudan, DNA tells another tale, one we never expected, one we can no longer ignore. Because in Kulabnardi, the foreign blood, the Eurasian component that startled geneticists, didn't come from men. It came from women. The entire narrative flips. It was the mothers who brought the outside world in. Their mitochondrial DNA, passed from generation to generation, revealed that foreign ancestry flowed through maternal lines. This defies the usual pattern seen across the ancient world, where invading or migrating men left their mark through the Y chromosome. Here, the women carried the shift. This wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern, repeated in burial after burial. So how did this happen? Why would Eurasian maternal ancestry dominate in a Nubian community over 1,000 years ago? One clue lies in the social structure of the time. The people of Kulabnardi may have lived under a patrilocal system, where men remained in their homeland and women moved to marry. These women, possibly from Egyptian or Near Eastern backgrounds, settled among Nubians, blending cultures not by sword, but by family. And yet, this mobility wasn't marked by prestige or conquest. It wasn't elite women in golden litters crossing into noble houses. It was quiet, personal, invisible to the archaeologist's eye, but undeniable in the genome. Some of these women may have been traders' daughters, others possibly displaced or even enslaved. We don't know their names, but their genetic legacy endured, not just through their children, but through an entire reshaping of the population's ancestry. And this shift didn't erase local identity. It wove into it. The result was a population with deeply African roots and threads of Western Eurasian maternal ancestry stitched delicately into the fabric. A fusion not of domination, but of coexistence. The assumption that men wrote the story of human movement is no longer enough. The truth is far more intricate, far more human, because DNA does not flatter our assumptions. It doesn't care for gender roles, heroic myths, or national pride. It simply records what happened. And in this case, what happened was this. The most significant shifts in Kulabnardi's genetic landscape came through the footsteps of women, mothers of mixed legacy, carriers of change, bearers of identity. For centuries, people have tried to draw lines between tribes, between nations, between us and them. These lines appear on maps, in textbooks, even in politics. But when geneticists looked into the blood of Sudan, the lines began to blur. And then they vanished. Because purity is a myth. Across Sudan, populations considered distinct, Nubians, Arabs, Beja, Nilotics, carry overlapping genetic markers. The boundaries we thought were clear begin to dissolve when we zoom into the genome. Ancient migrations, trade networks, intermarriage, and survival strategies left behind something far more complex than identity categories, a continuum. When researchers ran genetic clustering algorithms on samples from across the region, 3 patterns emerged. People from northern Sudan grouped closer to Egyptians. Southern populations aligned more with East African Nilotics. The Beja and Somali stood somewhat apart, forming their own cluster. But the overlaps were everywhere, shared alleles, common ancestry, subtle gradients instead of borders. And it didn't stop there. Nubians, long viewed as a distinct ethno-linguistic group, carry signals both from ancient Egyptians and from Dinka-related southern populations. Their DNA doesn't adhere to modern geography or colonial classifications. It flows along the Nile, reflecting thousands of years of connection. The same goes for Sudanese Arabs, though they speak Arabic and trace cultural lineage to the Arabian Peninsula. Their genetic makeup includes significant sub-Saharan African ancestry. Y-DNA may lean toward the J lineage, associated with the Middle East, but the maternal line tells a different story, one rooted in Africa. This is not contradiction. It is coexistence. Cultural identity often masks genetic plurality. A person may call themselves Arab, Nubian, Beja, but their genome tells a broader story. One that defies labels. One that carries whispers from ancient Kushites, migrating Copts, Nilotic foragers, and desert traders. And this isn't unique to Sudan. It's just more visible here, because Sudan sits at the heart of Africa's great crossroads, where continents met and civilizations touched. The Nile, once thought to divide empires, actually connected them. Its waters carried not just goods, but genes. People moved north and south along its banks. Some returned. Others vanished into history. But their genetic footprints remain. So what happens when we strip away the fiction of ethnic purity? We find something more powerful, a shared origin, messy and beautiful, forged by survival, adaptation, and relentless movement. Sudan proves that identity is not a wall, it's a mosaic. One that's always shifting, always unfinished. Not all evolution is written in nature's hand. Some of it, we wrote ourselves through fire, through ritual, through the way we lived, loved, and survived. In Sudan, the line between culture and biology doesn't just blur, it fuses. The people didn't only adapt to their environment, they reshaped their own genomes through the weight of tradition. Take milk, a simple drink. But for the Beja, the Fulani, and other pastoralist communities in Sudan, milk was more than sustenance, it was survival. Over generations, their bodies responded. Mutations arose that allowed adults to digest lactose long after childhood. Today, these lactase persistence genes exist in multiple forms across East Africa. Proof not of outside influence, but of independent convergent adaptation. Culture drank the milk. Biology adapted. And that's only the beginning. In the arid plains of western Sudan, among the Baggara Arabs, another mutation took hold, the sickle cell gene. Normally, it would be rare, but consanguineous marriage, deeply rooted in tribal custom, allowed it to concentrate. In regions where malaria was a killer, this gene offered partial protection. A brutal bargain, more carriers, but also more suffering. Culture preserved the risk to gain a defense. Even more striking are the discoveries emerging from genome-wide scans. Variants tied to visceral leishmaniasis, malaria resistance, and even COVID-19 severity appear differently across ethnic groups in Sudan. Why? Because each population followed a distinct path through environment and behavior, facing different diseases, consuming different diets, observing different kinship rules. What begins in a village? Who marries whom? What children eat? How communities respond to illness? Echoes in chromosomes. Over time, these decisions become visible at the molecular level. It's not just about selection. It's about direction. Culture provides the compass. Evolution follows. For instance, certain genetic variants in Sudanese populations point toward ancient practices of cattle domestication, embedded in social customs and even religious symbolism. Rock art near the Nile shows not just animals, but reverence, procession, and ritual. Cattle weren't only herded, they were honored. That reverence rewired biology. Modern genetics allows us to see what anthropology could only guess, that how people live shapes what people become. And in a place like Sudan, where environmental extremes demanded innovation, the genome became a ledger of adaptation, not to climate alone, but to ideas. Because the Sudanese didn't just survive, they culturally engineered survival. Their genes don't just reflect their past, they reflect their choices. In global genetics, the loudest voices don't always carry the deepest truths. Genomic research has soared in the past 2 decades, mapping everything from disease pathways to ancestry networks. But even as databases swelled with millions of samples, one region has remained dangerously underrepresented: Sudan. And yet, few places on Earth hold as much genetic significance. While global studies pivot toward Europe, East Asia, And North America, Sudan sits in silence. Its people's DNA seldom included, rarely referenced, often misunderstood. The irony is staggering. This land, once a biological artery for early human migrations, remains almost invisible in the genetic conversation that shapes modern science and medicine. What does that mean in real terms? It means diseases manifest differently, and we don't know why. It means certain treatments fail in African populations, not due to lack of science, but due to lack of data. It means researchers are running simulations of human health without key pieces of the equation. And those missing pieces? They're hidden in Sudanese genomes. Sudan's populations carry immense genetic diversity, much of it unique. Their lineages survived environmental extremes, social upheaval, and centuries of admixture. From deep-rooted mitochondrial lineages to highly varied autosomal markers, they hold clues to ancient resistance mechanisms, adaptation to infectious disease, and even complex conditions like cancer and diabetes. But without that data in the system, those clues remain silent. In many global reference panels, alleles common in Africa are misclassified or ignored. Some so-called reference alleles used to define what's normal in Western populations may be pathogenic in Sudanese groups. That's not just a scientific oversight. That's a medical risk. And it goes deeper. Effective population size, a measure of how much genetic diversity a group carries, has been shown to be much higher in African populations, especially in northeast regions like Sudan. That means these populations offer the widest possible range of natural mutations. From an evolutionary standpoint, that's gold. From a medical standpoint, it's priceless. And yet, the world isn't listening. Sudanese DNA could help untangle the roots of genomic disorders, sharpen the precision of ancestry inference tools, and revolutionize how we approach personalized medicine in African-descended populations across the globe. But without inclusion, there's no progress. Without investment, there's no discovery. So the question is not whether Sudan matters in the field of genetics. The question is, how much longer can we afford to ignore it? The answer may determine whether the next chapter in genomic science is truly global, or just another echo of exclusion. Before cities, before borders, before gods or flags, there were people. People who moved, people who struggled, people who loved, died, and were buried by rivers now forgotten. And in Sudan, more than anywhere else, those people left behind not just their tools or bones, but the quiet architecture of all of us. Every human alive today carries pieces of an ancient puzzle. But in Sudan, the pieces are more vivid, more primal, more unbroken. Here, amidst the parched soil and forgotten tombs, is not just a story of the Sudanese. It is the genetic echo of humanity itself. We tend to think of the past in terms of empires and rulers. But the most enduring legacies are those etched in DNA, passed silently, generation after generation, immune to war, famine, or fire. And now, for the first time, we have the tools to listen. What those tools reveal is profound, that the men and women buried in Kulubnardi, in Kerma, in Meroe, were not exotic outliers. They were nodes in the same network that connects us today. Their genomes carried mutations still present in our cells. Their lives, though lived without electricity, maps, or medicine, shaped the biological structure of our present. These weren't pharaohs. They weren't kings. They were ordinary people whose DNA now guides cutting-edge science. They remind us that legacy isn't about monuments. It's about what survives inside us. But their story is also fragile. Conflict, displacement, and environmental degradation now threaten not only Sudan's people, but the very remains that hold these ancient truths. Every site lost, every sample unrecovered, is another page of our origin story burned before it's ever read. We stand at a crossroads. Either we listen to the ancient voices encoded in Sudan's soil, or we let them fade, unheard. And if we let them fade, we lose more than knowledge. We lose our connection to a truth more powerful than any national myth, that there is no single human history, only a braided stream of shared becoming. When we peer into the genomes of these long-gone ancestors, we aren't looking into someone else's story. We're looking into our own reflection, distorted by time, but never severed. Their bones are silent, but their message is not. We are all their legacy. Some stories never made it into textbooks. Not because they were unimportant, but because no one looked in the right place. Sudan is that place. A land where history wasn't carved into stone, but woven into blood. Now, for the first time, we can read it. From the petrous bones of children buried in silence, to the invisible signatures of Eurasian and African ancestries intertwined, to genomes echoing the impact of culture, environment, and survival. The people of Sudan have given us a window into our shared beginning. But this isn't the end of the story. It's only the beginning. Because what Sudan reveals is something no ancient scroll or crumbling temple ever could. That human identity is not a border, it's a bridge. That migration is not the exception, it's the rule. And that the past doesn't just live behind us. It pulses beneath our skin. The question now isn't what happened. It's what we do with what we know. We know that DNA from underrepresented populations like Sudan's is essential, not just for understanding our roots, but for advancing global medicine. We know that ancient remains in forgotten deserts carry answers to diseases, traits, and evolutionary mysteries we've only begun to grasp. We know that modern political divisions are paper-thin compared to the deep, ancestral connections revealed in the genome. So, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you see the Nile not as a line dividing Africa, but as a lifeline that once nourished the world? Will you question the myths of ethnic purity and embrace the truth that every one of us is a mosaic? Will you help bring these stories to light by sharing them, studying them, remembering them? Because if we don't tell these stories, they vanish. If we don't look into these genes, the voices go unheard. If we don't act, the forgotten chapter stays forgotten. But if we do, if we listen, learn, and carry these legacies forward, we don't just rewrite the story of Sudan. We rewrite the story of all of us.